Hello, good evening. Welcome, everyone, to another Tuesday night with us at PoliTalks. It's me, Summer Sibley Brown. I am one of the co-hosts of the show, and tonight I will be hosting with the other crew. Frank Robinson, my gracious lead co-host, is off in the world making fabulous drinks and entertaining people this evening, but he will be back. Yeah, I want to just say thank you for joining us. We have some other cast members who are going to be joining tonight's show. We're going to be discussing a couple of things. It's really, truly very conversational, talking about community events, talking about the town hall series that's happening. We have guests from that series, other nonprofit organizations who have graced us on the show a few weeks back. May 18th, to be exact, will be joining us to tell us about the second town hall in the series. We're going to be talking a little bit about, World Ocean Day and World Ocean Week activities and sustainable development goals and whatever else we stumble into. If you watch PoliTalks, you know that this conversation is everything but linear, but hopefully meaningful and intersectional, right? So I'm gonna wait for our cast to join us and we're gonna begin to jump into the topic. Hello, Darren.
Hey, good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing?
I'm doing wonderful. What's up, Sid?
Hi, everybody. What's up? Doing well.
Yeah. What is up is we're talking about a series of things tonight, right? So tonight I'm super excited to be in a meaningful but maybe less formal conversation style where we can just talk about everything them, right? But to include what's up in our community, the upcoming town hall, and like what's up in the world, right? Why oceans are important. Kemet's gonna be on in a little bit. He told us closer to 7, so we can expect him and to join us. And we have 2 guests. So how are you all feeling? Sid, I saw you were talking, but I didn't know if you were talking to me.
I was not talking to you. I was making sure that my background was super quiet.
I literally just had to do that. I just was like screaming to the people in the next room, like, we can hear you. So I understand producing from home.
No, I mean, I like conversations like what we're having tonight. I consider myself an amateur environmentalist, if that makes sense. Like I care about the island. I care about the environment in general, and I love sustainability talks because I learn something new every day. And having people like Kemet on, Frandel on, who are doing really interesting work when it comes to sustainability. I always learn something new, so I'm sure I'm going to have some interesting questions tonight. Learn some stuff that I didn't know before. I'm excited for the town hall too. I think they're necessary.
Yeah, mute.
I just did the same thing, right? That I was like, Sid, you're on mute. And then I was talking. I was like, before our guests join us, I think, Sid, you framed this really well. He was like an amateur environmentalist. I don't even think I am. I wouldn't even give myself, like, if that was a Girl Scout badge, I wouldn't even get that, right? But I am keenly aware that environment is important, you know, and that increasingly aware that climate change is real and that what we thought were once renewable and infinite resources are not infinite, right? And so there's a level of stewardship. And I want to say, like, that's a really recent, like, if I'm honest, that's a really recent thought process, right? Like, wasn't a thought process in my 20s, wasn't a thought process in my early 30s, late 30s, yeah, and definitely early 40s. I'm like, I get it. Like, things don't just regenerate if we're not caring for them. Yeah, that was my point. I think. Anything you want to add, Darren?
No, I was gonna say I fully agree with you. Like the environment is definitely important. And sometimes we kind of bypass the environment to think about in that capitalistic capitalistic society, but they go hand in hand. Like if you don't take care of your environment, then you can't really you erode your possibilities of making money. So you also I was one that I was meet in the middle somewhere. But not to, of course, not to say in the expense of our environment. We need to be able to live, breathe, need to enjoy our islands and the world when you play it that way. So I feel like the topic of like climate change is evolving. I think at least for us, like I know me and Sydney's generation, we kind of our generation came into the climate change conversation, and I'm just glad to see it continuously evolve, be far more reaching, and definitely want to hear more about it each and every day. It just continues to expand, and just want us to be as a society be stewards about it, and just really do our little part to make a big generation. I mean, not a big generation. Sorry, a big contribution to it. Sorry, I apologize.
So before we bring our guest on, and I hope this is a good segue, one of the things that I do when I want to like understand something, I know we use the English language. People use it, we're always using words. And every time I'm going into a topic more deeply, the first thing I do is I Google the definition of that word to just like clarify and sharpen my understanding of like, what the denoted or the written definition of this word means. What am I actually talking about? So as we were on this platform, I just Googled it and we were using the word environment. And I was like, what does environment actually mean? And this is the Google definition that I'm going to read out. The surroundings or conditions in which a person, animal, or planet lives or operates. Right? The surroundings or conditions. So your environment is not just the physical place, right? That's what that definition just illuminated for me. It's not just the physical place, the surroundings, it's also the conditions in which a person, animal, or plant lives or operates. And then they had a second one is the natural world as a whole or in a particular geographical area, especially as affected by human activity, right? And I think that's important because as we bring on our guest, and I guess again in this role I'm functioning as a host and a guest, the town hall that we're having this Thursday is about the impact of heavy industry on our food, right? And that's that human activity piece. And in climate change, they're using a really fancy word like the Anthropocene age and saying that the decline of this specific age or the decline or the impacts on our environment in this specific age are primarily human. The reason why we are experiencing these things is not so much of natural causes, but the impact of human activity microwaving or creating certain conditions that we're now all operating in that have a sense of urgency, like things we could run out of. And so I know, did I just sound geeky when I went into like all of the things that my brain does to understand something? But it was just interesting.
No, I mean, like
Very good.
my intro, I learned something. I did not know that word existed. I'm going to go Google it now.
Anthropocene, yes.
I like it. It's a fancy word. I just, and, thinking about how you identify with your environment too. Us as West Indians in the Caribbean region, we use our environment, our natural resources, as an identifier of who we are. It's in our tourism product. It's something that we take a lot of pride in. And I tend to think about, all of the events that have been happening recently in terms of Lime Tree, in terms of us trying to figure out what is important to us as a people. You know, for a long time, even me thinking back, and I think this is probably a good question for Franda when she comes on, looking at the history of the oil refinery on St. Croix and us as a people at some point not thinking or reevaluating how does the refinery impact our identity, as um, considering how much we value and place our environment as a product to show people how beautiful we are. I tend to reflect on that and try to figure out, because I wasn't there at the time when they decided to do the Hess agreement or the Benza agreement. You know, particularly for St. Croix, and how we also are really close to agriculture and farming, and that's part of our history as well. It's just those things are conflicting as identifiers of who we are, and I wanted who made those decisions, and that's why these town halls are so important, because it's so many people and there's a pattern of so many people saying, this is who we think we are, but we're moving in a different direction in terms of identity. Where's the break in communication? That was really long-winded, but it's me reflecting on, like, I know that we care about our land so much. We care about how beautiful our beaches are. We tell people how beautiful our sunsets are in summer and all of these things. Those things are impacted by the refinery and the decisions that we make over time. And I think I'll talk about this later, but there are really good examples of other Caribbean islands who've really done great work in protecting their environment in a very strict way, which has actually increased the outside world's admiration for the work that they do, and have attracted more people because of how protective they are of their environment. And I hope that we'll have more conversations like that moving forward.
Oh my gosh.
Something we thought.
Thank you for feeding that in, because I can't wait to dive into that conversation with you, because I think it adds to the value of the destination. And some of the most sought after destinations are those destinations that have those really strict protective environmental and cultural barriers. And I would like to go ahead and invite our guest on to join us so they can become part of this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Frandel and Jen, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we kind of got the conversation started without you guys, and I didn't expect it to be like I have this really. I just want to make a blanket statement. I know maybe hopefully you ladies heard some of it. So this statement won't be out of place for you, and then we'll transition into brief introductions of each of you, and then we could go back into the conversation. But on this show, we talk a lot about colonialism, we talk a lot about oppression, we talk a lot about injustice, we talk a lot about structural racism. Like we're always taking the conversation there. And in reading, I don't know how many of you have followed it, but in reading the David Bond articles, the 6-part series, what it occurred to me, right, when it talked about, I forget which governor, but was mentioning that he wanted to get rid of agriculture because it was like tied to feudalism. And now I live in an age that what was enlightened for me is that the biggest symbol of oppression I have in my community and injustice is that refinery. And I'm not blaming Lime Tree for that, because there is a long history that a 6-part series outlays, right? But the truth is, if I'm looking for a symbol of colonialism and capitalism, of labor that that doesn't serve community, that is very extractionary, it is that, like that. If it is anything those articles did for me, was clarify what one of the largest symbols of oppression is that we look at. Anyway, and we could get back to that, but I just had to name that. And like I said, those decisions were made a long time ago, and we're at a nexus point where we get to make different decisions, but I don't think the whole community or the leaders in place may share my value system around what I just shared, right? And with that being said, Frandel, would you like to just give yourself a quick intro?
Well, good evening, everyone. Frandel Gerard, thank you for inviting me. I'm the Executive Director of CHANT, Crucian Heritage and Nature Tourism, and a member of the nonprofit consortium environmental sector under the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development.
And Jen, please, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. My name is Jen Valulis. I'm the executive director of the St. Croix Environmental Association, and also part of the nonprofit consortium with the St. Croix Foundation. I'm really glad to be here. I'm actually a big fan of your show, and it's always really thought-provoking. So it's exciting to be part of the conversation tonight.
And then I guess I'll introduce myself, which might seem really weird. I'm like, I'm switching hats, right? But that's why this is a conversation. Summer Sibley Brown. Most of you watching PoliTalks know me as a co-host for PoliTalks, for part of this team, but I am also one of the nonprofits, Virgin Islands Good Food Coalition, who is part of the nonprofit consortium, who sits in the environmental sector and has the honor of working with these two awesome ladies quite frequently, and in recent times more frequently than normal, to host a series of town halls. And so what I wanted, or the question I wanted to pose to both you and Frandel and Darren and Sydney, please feel free to jump in, is why a series of town hall, right? Like, what is the value of a series of town halls?
I think there's a lot to this issue. I mean, it's a huge. Lime tree and heavy industry in general has affected us in a lot of ways. We saw the very acute effects, the emergency effects a couple of weeks ago when we were having a hard time breathing, when people were getting very ill. And so that's one issue. And that took us, a full hour and a half to 2 hours to talk about. But there's a lot of other parts to this problem. And this week's topic is food impacts, which is just as important. We're all eating food and drinking water, and that hasn't really been addressed in the monitoring and in the regulatory parts of it. And so it's important for people to know that this is an issue, that another way that it can be affecting them, and to be able to ask those questions. And then just the last town hall we're doing is more of a, I think, positive, looking forward, talking about sustainability. And we could probably do a town hall each month, focusing on a different issue.
Hi, I agree. We had a major emergency or a series of emergencies culminating with the big one in April, May. I'm losing track of time, but May. And we're at a crossroads and making decisions about our future. And I think the series of town halls gives the community the opportunity to get the information, get the facts from, the policy people, the people that are responsible for regulatory and compliance issues, but then also, more importantly, for the community to state their concerns, to ask the questions that matter to them, and to see if we get them answered. Because we're at a position where the community needs to develop the answers. We can no longer depend on the largesse of corporations or the decision-making processes of elected officials, because it doesn't necessarily represent what the community is concerned about, what the community wants, and what the community cares about. So, the series is going to allow us, this next one is going to really focus on the impacts on the soil and the water and the ocean and the farmers and the fishermen, so that's going to be that focus. And the next one is going to be more forward looking, so that we can get out of the mindset of jobs versus death or jobs versus health. It's not a choice that we don't have to make the choice to be employed or get jobs that cause irreparable health damage or irreparable damage to our environment. So what are our choices? And there are so many that we need to begin putting those on the table so that folks that are in that box that think that that's the only way we can get a job or create employment can perhaps broaden their view about the opportunities for not just meaningful employment, but meaningful entrepreneurial development of people from the island of the island.
I think that's important what you said, and I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, thinking about moving forward and thinking beyond really what we've known and been comfortable with, and that's been safe in terms of stability, right? That's something that we've always looked for. But I absolutely agree with you, Frandel. I don't think that they're two separate things, and I think that the town hall that you guys are having now is important for us to understand why looking at the future differently is important. Because, and they say this all the time, but it's very real. If you're not thinking about how this is affecting your children, and how long, or, if this is going to affect them in 20, 30 years, if this is going to affect you being able to support your family in 10, 15 years, weighing, is it worth it? And looking at ways that we truly can have both in terms of industry, sustainable industry, clean industry that falls in line with, again, like I said earlier, who we believe we are as people and who we believe we are as an island, and really respecting and valuing that. I think that there's a middle ground, or there's a way to kind of address both of those and have people feel safe, healthy, and stable, right? Economics wise, jobs wise, all of those things.
I think, Darren just asked, we got to multitask here, but Darren just asked, is this, is the lime tree trickle down economics? Yes, but there's a big but. It's also extractive economics. Although they're not pumping well, actually they are pumping oil out of the ground, but although, we're not the source of the raw material, when you look at what is processed and taken out, and the number of contractors who come in and go out, and the money goes out. So there's this outward flow. Right, always has been. But the other thing that we have to look at, and I know some friends of mine are going to get upset about this, is the outward flow from St. Croix to the Virgin Islands that has been, minimized. But St. Croix has been the major source of economic stability for 50 years when you look at oil and rum. Our major bonds are backed by oil and rum, or had been, right? So where the income that is being generated on St. Croix is now supporting the growth in the Virgin Islands and the growth of sustainable middle class in the Virgin Islands overall. And are we getting our fair? Are we getting our fair share? Are we getting the right return? Is there a reinvestment into our economy, our infrastructure, our environment, since this island is paying the price? Our health, forgot our health. So, where's the proportionality in those extractive forces? We could talk about that all night.
So I wanted to ask Darren and Sid a question based on what you and Jen fed in. Both Jen and Frandel use language. Jen in the beginning of her intro, right? And so we're talking about the impacts of heavy industry on food and agriculture and fisheries and wildlife and on the water that we drink. And she said, we had an acute incident, right? And the first thing I thought about is like medicine, right? I thought about somebody having an injury that's in an acute state, and we're talking about sustaining their life, right? Like this is an emergency, we have to tend for it. And then Frandel used the word, like we've had a series of major incidences. Darren and Sid, in the community, are you feeling like people are feeling the sense that this was acute and that this was major? Because it's like, acute for who? I mean, like, I'm just wondering, what was your take on what happened with those incidences?
I think definitely you could. I think there was like a various reaction. Like I think there were some people that was adversely affected by the fumes, if you want to call it for lack of a better term, and then there were others who are like I guess they were just had various levels of response to it because they probably weren't being personally affected by it. But then there was others who weren't affected by it, but still still concerned about the environmental impact and the health of the people. So I think there was three various responses I saw. I think all deserves to be heard. I just think that we have to be mindful of not because you're not being personally affected by it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on somebody else. So I think that's where I was with this whole topic or situation, I should say.
Yeah, it was the same for me. I think that there were varying responses. It depended on where you were on island. It probably depended on how closely connected you were to the refinery. And I mean, whether you were working in the refinery, you are a family member of somebody who's working in the refinery, if you have no connection to the refinery whatsoever, those changed answers or responses that I saw. And yeah, I mean, it's really about the conversations that we need to have is really about thinking long term, because I think that's where everybody will have an understanding of um, why it's a community issue. Because long term, it's going to trickle to everyone. How the things that are happening now affect us. Um, I think it. I agree. Acute, is a good word for it. Because even for not negative, but the responses that were alarming, the ones that were concerned for what was happening, also triggered those who were very defensive of the jobs and the refinery as well. And that was a very acute response too, because it was also a threat to their stability. And those those two things interacting really brought it to the forefront. Thinking about the history of the refinery, and even with Hovenza and the environmental issues that they had, we've never gotten this amount of press before. Why? Because of how quick and how responsive and loud our voice was around the back-to-back issues that we had. We've never had this type of national coverage, and I think that's due to how acute and quick and close the incidents were.
So I want to ask Jen and Frandel two questions, because both their nonprofits have specific areas of work, and I want to know how food and fisheries are related in terms of the impact of heavy industry and why they might be carrying this torch. But I wanted to say the opposite of acute is chronic, right? So and I think that's important for people to know, because when you're talking about body pain, right, and your shoulder hurting you so intensely right now, for instance, example, raining oil, right? Acute stage, my body is actually really having a reaction. And it's an emergency and it needs to be attended to in this moment so I could just sit, breathe, exist. That doesn't mean doctors refer to long-lasting pain more bearable over time doesn't mean that your acute symptoms aren't there. They're just not flared up. You have a chronic condition, but what forced you to come to the doctor is an acute attack. And so, Jen, I love the use of the word acute because it positioned for me that we had an acute situation which called our attention, but we have a chronic issue that we need to address and sustain effort around. And anyway, so that was just one highlight of this conversation already for me because I wasn't thinking in those terms, acute and chronic. But Jen, so heavy industry and the impact on the food we grow and the impact on the fisheries and wildlife. You work for St. Croix Environmental Association. What does that actually mean to you? Why is this particular town hall important to the work that you do?
So I'm going to sort of hedge a little bit on this because I'm learning a lot as we go. I've learned, you said, Sydney, earlier about being an amateur environmentalist. I might get paid for it, but like I know about this much about it. And so I knew nothing about refinery operations until the last couple months. I didn't know what the chemicals were. I knew what they smelled like. I didn't know that oil rained down because of these things. What it means, to me is it affects what we eat. It affects the ecosystems that we study, the ecosystems that we rely upon for our fisheries. It's sort of all tied together. I guess it's hard for me to separate exactly what it means because it's all part of the environment. The environment is defined often too narrowly as being about tree hugging and sea turtles and stuff like that. And so this is one of the biggest aspects of the environment that people may not think about as being part of the environment. I'm not sure if I'm making sense about this, but agriculture isn't always tied to the environment. And sometimes it's actually seen as in conflict, but it's not. This is a case where environmental impacts are actually affecting all of us. And I think that kind of defining that within the environment is important. I don't know if that quite made sense.
You absolutely made sense because what I heard, let me recap, is like we're looking at this from a broader lens, right? On the show, I often talk about systems change, right? And because that's another part of the thing I do in another life. And one of the things that we realize, like that narrow division, the definitions we use to understand something, they're all constructs. In real life, this is all messy. There's no separation. Like it all happens together. Our language is for understanding, but it doesn't necessarily in real life tease anything apart. Frandel, you work in heritage and nature tourism, right? I like one of my favorite things is you used to host a really big food event, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does heavy industry and the food that we actually impact the way in which Chant can do its job in this community?
Well, we promote sustainable development and culture and heritage, and the environment is our culture. It is our heritage. The land, everything that comes with it, the sea, and when you promote, a place as a resource for connecting with the environment, getting into nature, a South Shore industrial corridor sort of it's the opposite of what we're promoting. And then on the other side, there's, there are the long-term effects on every aspect of our life. All of us are out there eating mangoes now, right? And without fear, because there's no need to fear. But we don't know what chemicals were put out in the air. What we do know is that they settle on our roofs and on the ground. And our plants are in the ground. So, 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 scientifically, we know that these things are having an impact on our soil, our water, which means our food, our fruits, our fisheries. But what are those impacts? One of the favorite places for people to go and throw a line is on the South Shore down by the container port, right? You go throw a line. Well, there's a whole lot of chemical stuff that's going out into that water, legally, by the way, a lot of it legally, sanctioned. So we have to understand that, if we're about our food, our culture, our fish, our enjoyment of that as part of our life, that then we need to protect it and preserve it. We need to make sure that it's going to be there for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. And it's without addressing, the causal factors of environmental degradation, we cannot address the repair. And we're in that stage now worldwide where rapid repair has to occur for my grandchildren's grandchildren to have a world to live in that's safe from environmental catastrophe.
Welcome, Kemet. So nice to have you. Thank you for joining us. I don't know if you got to hear any of the conversation before you came in. You did great. Happy that you're in tune, because I wanted to just bring you into the conversation really quickly. One, today is World Ocean Day. Is it? Did I get it right?
Yep.
And I know about your love affair in the water, which means you have a love affair with ocean life, including the fish that we eat. And this next, we're talking about the Town Hall series, and the topic being heavy industry and the food we eat. And I just want to know, what is that application? What does that mean to you, a person who's actually dedicated your life to a specific portion of the food that we can consume and of wildlife, which is ocean life?
Right. So good evening, Summer, and thank you for the welcome. It's always good to join you guys. Apologize for being late. I was that guy in the truck on the road, yelling at the top of my lungs, but it wasn't me singing to some song. It was like, yes, Sydney, yes, Summer, yes, Darren. Yes. There's a lot of that going on. I'm sorry that I'm late to have joined the conversation, but happy that I could make it here today. It's been a long day, and I've been fired up all day as Capitol Hill Ocean Week began today. And notwithstanding the session that I was in today that focused on the relationship between the United States and the U.S. territories with regards to diversity and equity in the ocean sciences, with regard to environmental justice, and regards to climate adaptation strategies. We had a number of different sessions today that were just very insightful, very thought-provoking. And I really appreciate that this year's conference is really rooted and focused on equity and diversity. And it shows by the panelists and the other speakers that have been invited to present. Having said that, as I started creating my opening remarks for my panel today, I was going in one direction, and it quickly changed as the day that I started to write was literally the day of the last incident at Lime Tree, and the day after the first town hall that you guys had. And so I was able to use or continue to gather information as a scientist. That's what I do all day, every day. But yeah, it was, it completely changed, and the focus was heavy on Lime Tree and the industry. having gone through that, I've also been fortunate to, as everyone else has, opportunity and access to the series by David Bond. And Summer, you mentioned it before. It's on practically all of our Facebook pages. So if you've missed it, feel free to look it up, also via the Synchroi source and maybe the Sistema source, or the VI source, however that works. But those are some really good tools for us to read, digest, and start to think about what the future should look like. One of the things I wanted to make clear was that the issue with the refinery industry, it's not just an environmental justice issue, it's also a social justice issue. It's no coincidence that it ended up on this small community with people that look like us. And you know, there has to come a point where things radically change in our communities, not just on St. Croix, but across the United States. There's a lot of talk about equity and justice, but you know, it's 2021. We're still having issues around Black Lives Matter, around equality for folks in the LGBT in the community. I'm gonna mess that up, the acronym. We're still talking about equality issues for women. When you had a past presidents that felt it was okay to grab stuff in random places. We have issues with people of Asian and Pacific Islander descent. There's a long list of stuff that we have to continue to unpackage and start to address seriously. And this is one of those. And I think it needs to be a point where, yes, we're talking about environment. You know, Darren mentioned earlier, it's, you know, we need to find a way where we're not compromising one for the next in terms of environment and economics. But we're at a space in time right now where you don't have to think about compromising one for the next, because so many places are moving towards, or already have gone towards, clean and renewable energies, are already going towards sustainability. That model for how people can live and be sustained, but create a healthy and vibrant community is out there. And we have made excuses over and over and over again. I'm talking about the United States in general, for whatever it is. Again, whether it's the Black Lives Matter, or this refinery that, like I said in my remarks today, should have never been built on St. Croix, ever. There's lots of unused land across the United States that is not populated with people that could have been used, and that's the reality. But yeah, we need to start just calling things for what it is. If it's BS, we need to call it BS, and go get away from that era where we try to keep everyone happy and try to find balance, even if finding that pseudo balance means that we're neglecting a lot of just common sense things. And my mind is racing, but I'll pause there because it's not a one-man show.
So I wanted to ask a question to Kemet, Jen, and Frandel about thinking about the town hall. You're talking about heavy industry and its impact on agriculture, or impact on food. How did this topic come about? Did it come about from community members giving tangible examples of things that they saw or were impacted by after the flare-ups at the refinery? Was it conversations from scientists, like how, Kemit's talking about, impacts on the ocean? I want our viewers to be able to attach this broader conversation to something that's very real. And if there are, community members that came to you, whether it be with actual examples or concerns that you felt that this was a topic that needed to be addressed as something that's really real that we should talk about. And just to give Kemet a little more context, I'm thinking about, I can't remember what show it was, or maybe we were just talking offline about how on the South Shore, how the water flows and how it impacts certain fish that, swim through that area, and how we should be careful about eating fish on that side. I want to be able to give people like real, tangible examples of why we are even having this town hall, this conversation. Anybody can start.
So I can start. One of the examples, well, after one of the mishaps, as they like to call them, the one where oil was rained down into the neighborhood surrounding Lime Tree, we got a lot of phone calls. Our phone was ringing off the hook. And so, to speak back to that acuteness of it, it felt very acute because we were talking to all sorts of people that were feeling all sorts of effects. One phone call in particular was from a woman who, because of health restrictions, they grew all their own food, health and economic restrictions. They grew all their own food, and it was completely ruined because of this oil that rained down on them. And so they all of a sudden had to rip up their entire garden. They no longer had this food. They had to go purchase food. And because of the health restrictions, what they were eating was very specific, which is expensive. And so they lost that. They also lost all the water in their cistern, and the way that they were compensated, or at least addressed by the refinery, was to be given 10 cases of water. You can't eat water, especially not 10 cases of it. And so that has really stuck in my mind as, another way that was kind of what triggered it for me. And of course, from conversations with Summer, she's always bringing up that aspect of things, which is great because then I start to think about it as well. And as my background is actually as a wildlife biologist, and so that's often for me what I think about as well. And so, the fisheries and the turtles and the wildlife that is actually key to those systems, so birds and bats that are key parts of agriculture. We need them for pollinators. I've also had phone calls from people that were worried about the bees being affected, that they've seen declines in bees. And so those are maybe some more indirect effects, but those are things that I've been hearing about that feed into this topic.
People reached out to me. One in particular was a woman. She and her family, they're farmers, and her youngest child woke up in the middle of the night vomiting and couldn't breathe. And as she's going out in her farm, her garden, which is heavy on fruit, and it's their main source of their food, she calls me and she explains this, and is my food safe to eat? And I didn't know what to say, because if we're ingesting it, we know that everything around us is ingesting it. And then, another big issue is, and it came up as a result of research and a lot of documentation that's been offered and available to the public. But for some reason, a lot of people seem not to really know it or understand the gravity of it, is the largest oil spill in the United States is on St. Croix. And it's oil that spilled into the ground at that refinery and has contaminated our aquifer. And that is the source of water for every well that's dug on this island. So they've been pumping oil out of the ground at the refinery, and that oil is interacting with the water in our aquifer. I mean, I don't know if people just don't understand. There's an aquifer. There's this layer of water under a large part of St. Croix. It's just one aquifer, right? It isn't like there's an aquifer in Frederickstead and a separate one on the South Shore. It's all connected. Every farmer that we know that has a well has to be really careful. And one farmer reached out to me and said, pumping oil out of my well in LaGrange, right? You wouldn't think. But it's an old, deep well. So farmers are having to deal with this. Consumers of product have to deal with this. Fishermen have had to deal with this because there's some weird fish that's been fished on the South Shore, right? And what are the effects? That's one issue. This is chronic. Like you said, this has been going on for a long time. And now, what are the fixes? What are the resources available to us as a community, to the farming and fishing community? How do we fix these issues and address them so that in the future they're resolved, they're fixed, and going forward we have a healthier environment for our farmers and fishermen and our whole community.
Yeah, I just adding on to that part. That's a very good point, Prandel. And the Kings Hill Aquifer is it's huge. I think what's interesting about that whole thing is it was 43 million gallons of oil that was the last number that we got. That had spilled from leaky pipes and leaky tanks and whatnot that weren't maintained. And essentially the aquifer served as a storage tank for the refinery because the oil, as they were forced to remove it, the oil that they would pump out would be run back into the refinery and processed and then was sold. And so, yeah, it's when you stop and think about it, it's absurd that something like this occurs. No one knows about it on St. Croix. It's kind of how I felt about reading the articles by David Bond. I took for journalist history, and there's a lot of information about the first Green New Deal and everything about how the few appointed governors back in those days decided what was going to happen on St. Croix. Again, going back to this notion that everything is allowed when you've purchased the land and the people from Denmark. It's absurd, and I hope that we, again, go away from that. But yeah, I appreciate, before I talk about fishy stuff, which everybody assumes that I'll talk about, I appreciate the town halls because there's a lot of information that really needs to get to the public so that public can start making better and making informed decisions on who they elect as politicians and make sure that the people that do serve them have their best interests in mind. The South Shore, there's one quick story from my grad school days that come to mind. Well, two actually. One is, so we were out free diving for sea turtles. We set these nets to corral the turtles, and a diver would jump in, get the turtle on a boat. We'd measure them. We wanted to see, what the conditions of the turtles were, and we were hoping to do an assessment of heavy metals in the sea turtles, and do an assessment of heavy metals in the seagrass and sediment on those bays on the South Shore specifically, to see what the correlation between metal loading in the organisms were with the food that they ate, the food that they consumed, because we know that it accumulates, toxins accumulate up the food chain. We were out off of Good Hope School, and one of our volunteers swam back to the boat, freaking out. I almost said ran back to the boat, but he didn't run back to the boat. And it was because he, while out there, picked up something that he thought was human waste and was freaking out. And so we saw a number of them floating in the ocean, and we collected a few with gloves, put them in baggies, and then gave them to the Department of Planning and Natural Resources. And they ran some analyses on them and determined that what it actually was the waste molasses from Crucian rum that mats on the seafloor, and when it gets thick enough, will clump off and then float out to sea. As Brenda mentioned, this is one of a number of permitted or allowed discharges of waste directly into the ocean, and in as much as the addition of Diageo said that Crucian might adjust and not dump directly into the ocean. The last I believe I've heard is that they're actually back at that. It's supposed to be not as bad because it's not blackstrap molasses anymore, but still, it's, you're allowed to dump waste directly into the ocean when you and I can't do that by law. And then the second note is, while we didn't get to process all of the samples that I wanted, one of the first things we looked at was mercury, lead, and aluminum on the South Shore. And it was either the sediment or the seagrass samples, and we found elevated levels of aluminum. And that information was shared with the Division of Fish and Wildlife. It was sent to the Division of Environmental Protection. And it just went back and forth between those two agencies, and nothing ever got done with it. And I think, Sydney, that's where the conversation we had started in that, because I know just from my small snapshot of the heavy metals that do exist on the South Shore in the ocean, I would hesitate buying seafood from anyone that pull it in from the South Shore west of Hovensa. We also know that that's one of that is the St. Croix hotspot for ciguatera, and there's no coincidence that the hotspot for ciguatera exists where we have the refinery, the old, and this is back when the waste bauxite wasn't capped, Crucian rum discharge, and the landfill on the coastline, which the landfill should have been closed in 2008 when I worked at DPNR. It's still open today, FYI. So yeah, I in terms of the question, Summer, you had asked previously about stony coral tissue loss disease. We know that pollution does cause a number of lesions on corals and diseases and whatnot, everything from runoff to faulty septic tanks that are leaching waste into the ocean. The stony coral tissue loss disease, most of the field believes strongly that it originated in Florida. It's interesting because it arose or it became a thing right after the dredging of Port of Miami. And has spread like lionfish from Florida almost to everywhere in the Caribbean now. So again,
Yeah.
impacts, those impacts that are man-made, yeah, we've done a lot.
Listen, I told you, like, I was on this study, Velda Hendricks, there is a lot to converse on in the VI, what conservation initiatives are taking place. So I think, thank you, Ms. Hendricks, for feeding that in. I think that's part of where the series will end up going, right? We talked about we had one series in the beginning, the Engage VI, the first forum, to talk about what was happening then. We wanted to, and I'm saying we because in this conversation I am two things, right? So I'm talking as the executive director of Virgin Islands Good Food, who is in constant partnership with Frandel and Jen and other people in the community thinking about this to help people realize that the adverse effects of the acute incidents that we, have long-term effects. And one of the things that I wanted to know is like, how do we remediate soil? You could come and clean my roof. You could empty my cistern. You could clean it. You could paint it. You could fill it, right? Like you could do a really bang up job on doing that. How do you, what is the process for me reporting, testing, remediating my soil or fruit trees that have been adversely affected by an incident like that because the rain did not selectively decide to fall on a house alone. And, like for me, I became uber focused on the rain because I actually, it was just like, oh, wait, groundwater, soil, roots sucking up food that goes to sale in the markets with and I don't want to be an alarmist, but I do want to be careful. I think there's care and concern that has to be had about what we know to be a practical reality. If you want to go out and clean my roof, then why didn't you ask me to test my soil? And what is the number of, because we have a number of our community that engages with eating from their yard. We don't all go out from the yard and pick a little herbs here. You pick your mango, your soursop, your sugar apple. Everybody got recall. Everybody got time. Like we are a community of backyard gardeners. We are a community who share bananas over the gate and the fence still, giving your neighbors a bag of mango. Like, and as we enter the summer season, that increases. So that was one of the reasons it was like, whoa, this could have a larger impact. Then on top of that, as you said, Kemet, reading the David Bond articles, and I want to put on the record that David Bond will be at the town hall, right? Like, so you have an opportunity if you're reading the articles, if you're interested in interacting with him. We'll also have, Olasi Davis, who in his right equally knows a lot about our environment, our landscape, is engaged in being a cultural bearer and really have a lot of domain expertise, right? On native plants and trees and animals and trails and hiking and is like in holding that space in our community. So he'll also be there. And I think that's important for people to come here and interact and post their questions to them. And then as you were talking, Kemet, not that this is thing, I just Googled basic aluminum toxicity. Right? And anybody, I'm not going to say here what the adverse effects are, but I'm going to tell you because I don't want to be gaslighting anybody. But go ahead and look up aluminum toxicity and tell me what you find. And after, come on the PoliTalks chat and put what you find. Because I think, there is a need for a healthcare registry. And so Ms. Hendricks' comment went to conservation, right? But I think what she was asking, and Velda, let me ad lib, right? We need solutions and we need things that need to be addressed. And we are only exploring the tip of the iceberg, right? The tip of the iceberg. Okay, so that's my, I on top of the soapbox. I don't step down because it's the whole show.
Can I also add to that, Summer, to Ms. Hendricks' question? What conservation initiatives are happening, or even conservation conversations? You have to first also, as a community and as leaders, those who are leaders in our community, acknowledge and recognize that there are environmental issues to address. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like first step is acceptance, and then you move on from there. Because if we're not openly having that conversation about, impacts and decisions that we've made, how do we even have productive, constructive, proactive conversations around conservation? I think we need to start there and get everybody on the same page. But I know that there are, and I think I'm probably talking for people, but there are conservation initiatives happening. I know a lot of smaller grassroots initiatives that are happening, but it can't happen in these small silos. We need to kind of get together and hold one head around really just acknowledging that decisions that have been made for our people are impacting our people in this way, and we can figure out what our next steps are from there. So I just wanted to add that.
I just wanted to quickly add to Cindy's point because it reminded me of a thought that I've had for a number of years now. When the refinery first closed, we had an opportunity, and this is a big part of why I'll say it again. I always talk about refer to politicians and not to leaders. We had an opportunity to really think about what the future of St. Croix could look like. And we did not. And we end right back up in the same mess, because that's what it is, that we have finally gotten out of almost a decade ago when the refinery first closed. And yeah, Sydney, you hit the nail on the head. We need people to, one, own that there was a mistake, that there was a huge injustice made to the people and the space that is II St. Croix, and really focus on what should be our next steps moving forward. If the appointed governors back then could say, this Green New Deal is going to be great for the island. Those little people down there that can't make decisions for themselves, whatever their energy was at the time, now should be our time to say, we want to pilot, quote unquote, something also, but this is what our pilot should look like. And it should involve sustainability. It should involve clean and renewable energies. It should involve honest development of labor force, where people on St. Croix are, and a lot of people, that was their pushback. Well, if the refinery disappears, then what happens to all of the people that they employ? Well, all of those people that they employ should be hired or trained to dismantle what's there, to cap it, and to build and operate what's new. And what's new should be, and it's one of the things that I asked for today in my remarks to Capitol Hill, is the U.S. can easily invest in at least in the least clean and renewable energy plants for all of the U.S. territories. We're small enough to pilot it, to make it work, and we're small enough for you to get tangible results in a relatively short period of time. And that challenge to take it a step forward, and I didn't mention it today, but to take it a step forward, that could be the challenge that the U.S. as a quote unquote superpower puts out to the rest of the countries out there that still own lands of indigenous people that aren't of their own, to create these opportunities for these small islands that are impacted by climate change in a very different way than the superpowers that actually are causing the issues of climate change.
Frandel and Jen, I want to pivot to you guys. I know we've had some really long days, and I'm just so honored that you extended your day to join us. Please, if you would like to give us any closing remarks, wrap up, and then we're going to share the flyer of the town hall, both here and on the page. So, Frandel?
Sure. Well, thanks again for the invitation. And, we really hope that, the people who see this and hear it and, those people then talk to other people and encourage them to sign up and join us on the town hall. Because the one thing we're doing is soliciting questions and input from the listeners and viewers. And we're collecting that information. We're not throwing it away. If we don't get to ask your question, we're compiling all of those questions and we're getting them to the people that we think can provide some answers. But, it's about us taking control. If we've all read, and I think, having the opportunity to listen to David and Olasi is going to be, and hear them interact is going to be really informative, because they are coming, as scholars to this conversation. And we have an opportunity to take control, to not be, to no longer have decisions made for us by others. And, that when we go to testify in the legislature, excuse me, when they're making a decision about the future of St. Croix, that it's not just one or two of us that stand there and say, don't do this, but that there's 1,000 or 2,000 of us whose voices are channeled in a way that those policymakers know. We've got to listen to the people of St. Croix. And, our voices are being heard. I think, when we look at the national and international media coverage that this whole thing is getting, had C not stepped up and joined that suit against challenge the EPA, had a young woman who grew up on St. Croix and is now an environmental attorney named Elizabeth Neville hadn't stepped in to say, I volunteer, I'll put the legal work in, this wouldn't be happening. One person makes a difference, and now there's a collective.
Me and the mute button. Thank you so much, Friendel. Always a pleasure to be in your presence and hear your wisdom. Pivoting to Jen.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to speak about this. And I hope we can have further conversations because I think there's a lot to unpack still from this. It has been a long day, but this was actually a really great way to wrap it up. So please come to the town hall. To echo what Frandel said, the thing that has resonated the most when we've approached the EPA, when we've approached the national media about this, has been the community voices, because, data is important, but when you can show that these are real people that are being impacted, when we've been able to put our stories and just say, I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe, that I was being choked, when it smelled like this. And then also we had 300 other people call the EPA to report that. That was powerful, and that meant a lot. And so these town halls, the continued vigilance in reporting what you see, and it's really important for everyone to understand that what you feel, what you see, what you smell, what you hear is real. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, whether it's a manhole. I mean, there might have been a manhole, but, it's important to know that don't doubt yourself. These are real things that are happening to us. And so having these town halls, having these community meetings are really important to kind of make people feel like they're not out there alone and, blaming themselves or doubting themselves, because this is the power that we have here. Gosh, a lot more to say, but I think that's where I'd like to end. So thank you again.
Thank you both so much for joining us. We're gonna, in the last 50 minutes, we're gonna probably be debriefing about having such awesome guests. and the range of feelings that we may or may not be in as we consider all of the perspectives, right? So thank you again. And you guys are welcome to come on PoliTalks anytime. Just reach out. I'd love to have you individually. I'd love to have you back together, even just to talk about some of your programming, right? Like highlighting the good work that you're doing, not just be here to address acute situations. Thank you. All right, team. How was that for you? I mean, for me, it's a lot. Darren, you were quiet, and so I wanna poke into your brain a little bit. How you doing?
It was really good. Like the things that stood out to me was the amount of oil that was actually spilled. Like until Ms. Gerard said it today, like I had no idea that we literally was victims of the largest oil spill ever in the U.S. So that was very interesting information, and for me it was like I feel like we didn't make enough of a big deal of that. Like that's literally historical kind of stuff, a historical event that actually severely impacted our island, and for the fact that we have various things that happen in our community, this should have been yelled from the mountaintop, and the fact that it wasn't is kind of very disappointing for me. But that was very informative. I really love the conversation today. I'm glad to be part of it.
You know, I'm gonna re-quote. I mean, I'm gonna jack it up. I'm going to say my understanding of a quote that was on Facebook from one of my friends, one of my powerful friends on Facebook, and it was something to the effect like basically they was talking about forced silence is actually an act of violence, right? And Darren, I mean, in imagine when that happened. Like I think as a people and as a community, and even with our elected officials, I'm going to say let's think of best intentions, right? I think we live in a community that experiences scarcity to such an intense degree that nobody wants to be the person sitting in the seat that lets our bank account, let's a pay less payday happen, right? Because the truth is, there is a large impact to government when its largest employer goes away, right? When we haven't prepared. So, like, it's the conundrum for me is like all of these historical facts seem like the conditions were created for us to be in this position to always have to make this decision. And like as a community, we don't have the information to even understand how we got here, right? I mean, and that's just like it's a really there's just a tension there, right? I am mindful. Some of the people who I share my life with and I love very dearly are home because the refinery is back, right? My best friend and her husband are home because the refinery is back. And I have an issue with the fact that half of my island can't breathe. Aquifers are filled with oil and the potential continue environmental degradation or incidents, right? So I find myself in these like tensions around what is supposed to happen. And so I just wanted to name that if we have listeners there, it's like, who's like, well, if the refinery go away, that means family members might leave, right? Like a forced migration because there's no work. I don't know why I think.
I want to add to this, and I get frustrated. I empathize with with that sentiment. I absolutely get it, because this is 50 years or so of what we've known. You know what I mean? There are generations of Crucians and Virgin Islanders who've only known that this refinery existed before, you know what I mean? Like it's what they were born into. You know what I'm saying? So it's very much ingrained in the fabric of what St. Croix has been for decades. At the same time, I hope that we as a community think more of our people, um, than them being able to have one skill. I think that we are very talented, we are very intelligent, we are very resilient, and it just feels a little offensive to me that we think that, you know, like those who work in the refinery, right, especially those who are new to refining and new to operating in that space and have just entered into that industry, I hope that we think more of ourselves than just being a one-trick pony. We have so much talent, we have so much ideas, and I want us to be able to think outside of the box. And Kemet had really great examples of how you can restructure, you know what I mean, like a space like that in terms of industry, in terms of operating some type of, you know, large industry like clean energy, you know, sustainable development. There are all of these things that we can do on top of the fact that there are countries, cities, towns around the world who don't have a refinery and also do really, really good economically. So I don't understand why we think about the oil refinery as our only hope, our only route, our only future. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I you know, and this is talking to what Frandel was saying for the next town hall and thinking about our future. I just want us to be able to recognize that we are more than what this is, and we can be more. And then the last thing I'll say, I just remembered, was between 2012 when Hovenza closed down and 2016 when Lime Tree Agreement came to be, we're still here. You know, we talk about with hurricanes, how resilient we are and how, you know, we make it through and all of those things. I don't understand why we can't think of a St. Croix outside of the refinery, and understanding that if you want to see prosperity and you want to see all these things, hard work and tough decisions have to be made. And if we can make it through those 4 years without the refinery, we definitely can make it. And I'm not saying that, you know, I am a proponent of the fact that I don't think we need the refinery. And if it continues to be, that's fine, if there are, you know, things put in place to protect us. But at the same time, I think we can be just fine without it. We were fine for those 4 years, and I feel like Crucians in general are super talented, and we can be much more than what some who work there right now think that they are.
Preach, Sydney. I could probably listen to you for another half an hour straight on that. I agree on a number of different levels. It's funny, and anytime you or your mom speak, I'm like, I'm just there like, yes. But so many good points. I think that the fact of the matter maintains is that we have people making decisions for us, those that are non-residents, non-locals, and those that are locals. And the sad part about the ones that are locals, again, politicians that are making the decisions, is one, they're not equipped for the positions that they have, so they don't know how to make decisions, period. And they're lazy. There's nothing about innovation, nothing about forward thinking, nothing about looking at the rest of the Caribbean who have been, without the Bank of the United States, been forced to do and learn and create and be innovative. And again, we've talked about that in a couple shows, but I think it's long overdue that we start to like seriously look at the other Caribbean islands and other small developing islands to really understand and appreciate what they've been able to do to create their own economy around sustainability, around agriculture, around blue economies. You know, when you mentioned earlier, Sydney, about the other countries that were doing amazing things with their resources, Bonaire is like one of the prime examples. The marine protected areas there are amazing, and they are the way that they are because people take it seriously. It's not just, oh yeah, we have nice beaches and you should come to Bonaire. It's like, you will come to Bonaire and you will not touch, you will not break, you will enjoy it. and you will leave bubbles and take memories and nothing else. And we need to start moving towards that direction. In terms of the oil spill, Darren, that's by design that the masses on St. Croix don't know about it. That press is like press across the country. The ones that powers that be want to get out are the ones that will get out, and the ones that they want to keep quiet for whatever reason will be kept quiet. So in that issue resulted in a lawsuit where Hovensa paid or had agreed to pay $5.3 million, a civil penalty for the oil spill, and agreed to spend more than $700 million in new pollution controls to resolve the Clean Air Act violations. That's probably something that a lot of people don't know about either, that, that's a big part of the reason why they closed in the first place. It was a number of these fines that made it unsustainable for them to continue, or not profitable for them to continue to operate in the territory. And why anyone would think that it would sit, when you look at all of the structures that were built back in the day, that the people drove to the beach and took sand from the beach and used that to mix cement, and all the buildings started to crumble. We see that all throughout our towns. It's just the environment that the place exists. It's nothing but rust. And so why anyone would think that you could just put a Band-Aid on it and reopen it, it's crazy. Sydney, the spill occurred over a period of time. It was a number of years. Again, it was because of these pipes and tanks that were leaking, and so it just continued to leak into the aquifer. And I'll pause there so that Summer can close.
As you guys were speaking, a few things I want to say. If you are available to on Thursday night from 6 to 8, right, and you are so inclined and you're interested in more information, or you have questions, please register for the town hall. The flyers are on Facebook. It's Thursday, June 10th. It's the second of a 3-part series. We'd love for you to join us. This one is heavy industry and the food that we eat. I think, to Kemet, Sydney's point, to Darren's awareness, right? Like new information. We need more information so we as citizens of this territory can think for ourselves. Like, information is actually, for me, a measure towards sovereignty. If we don't know the whole story, then we actually can't make the decisions necessary or engage in our community in a meaningful way, because we have part of the information, right? And so I don't want you to be sold on my position. And you know what I mean? I don't want you to be sold on my thoughts, my thought patterns, my way of thinking. I want you to have access to enough information that you could critically think and stand in your position about what you think is the best for this community. And human beings could be on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Some people might be close to refineries. Some people might be get industry operating to include other heavy industries in a way that's environmentally safe and sound. And another great set of people might be, nope, it's fine the way it is. All those opinions that exist in our community should be informed by information. And that's, I think that's the point of PoliTalks. You hear our positions, but we're hoping that you're thirsty to go find, the facts that back up what you think should happen, and that you use your voice to say it. And then my closing thought is, as it is World Ocean Day and we talk about the world, I want to encourage the Virgin Islands, each one of us, and our elected officials, actually, to become more responsible global citizens. What happened here on our shores and in our grounds has an effect on our neighbors. and it has a place in the world, in the global story of environment. And as we hear environmentalists and more people warn against the coming of 2040, right? And the fact that Frandel used the word repair is just like, okay, I'm gonna stop the damage and it's gonna stay here and ain't gonna go no further and it's gonna be okay. We actually need to go in regeneration mode where there is a regrowth of whatever the environment is to its original state, so that our children have access to fish. Like, I don't think ocean acidification is real. And so, on World Ocean Day, my charge is look up these things for yourself, develop your own position, advocate for it, be in great debate and conversation with the people you love, because working across difference and sharing new ideas is the only way we're gonna be able to embrace the innovation that's necessary for us to pivot and even begin to imagine a St. Croix without harmful heavy industry or the voice necessary to demand that those industries operate within confines that we prescribe. So thank you all for joining. As usual, PoliTalks has some of my favorite people and favorite conversation. Thank you all for joining us this Tuesday night. We're going to be back next Tuesday, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. This is WTJX PoliTalks. See you next week.